LA and New York, you kind of understand what's going on there, but like cities like Shanghai, how do you educate yourself on the culture when throwing a brand in there as well?
I had to meet the local teams and walk those cities, understand
Tyler Rutstein, Chief Brand Officer,
Head of Commerce at Overtime.
understand the key trade zones, the hot neighborhoods, and really build a relationship, right? Because you'll always have a dynamic at a really large company on the global team and the market team. And the biggest and best work really comes when they're working together and synchronized. And it's not always the case, right? There's always challenges, there's always complexity. And sometimes the local market feels like global doesn't understand them, and the global team doesn't feel like the local market fully is, leaning into what they're trying to achieve. And so I was just trying to be a bridge builder, if you will, and work with the local teams and like fully immerse myself.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to How the Fuck Did You Get That Job? Today I'm stoked to have another Overtime member, Overtime Tyler. Hey everybody, and welcome back to How the Fuck Did You Get That Job? Today I'm stoked to have another Overtime member, Overtime Tyler. That's not his Instagram, but Tyler Rutstein is joining us today, coming out of University of Florida. Tyler has run the gambit of working in sports marketing, starting at Reebok, then running marketing for Adidas, and working his way to Chief Brand Officer of Overtime. I'm stoked to talk to him. Tyler, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, talk to me just a little bit about like your journey and like your college decision process of how you got to where you are today and beginning there.
Yeah, so I grew up in South Florida, so I was primarily only looking at Florida schools. And I have two older brothers. Both of them went to University of Central Florida, but my middle brother was trying to go to pharmacy school, and UCF does not have a pharmacy program. Maybe they do now, but UF did. And so I thought, oh wow, I'm gonna be in college if I get into UF with my older brother, which would have been really cool. He unfortunately did not get in, and he went to a different school, but he met his wife there, so it probably all happened for the best for him. But I got into UF, and arguably at that time too, no offense to the other Florida institutions, it was the best time to be there. It was the Tebow era. We had just come off back-to-back national championships with basketball. And so I went full force to UF and yeah, took it from there.
Did you always know that like sports was something that you wanted to work in, even in like high school, or?
More or less, yes. I had thought going into college that I wanted to work in sports. In what capacity, I didn't know. Part of me had this early dream that I wanted to write Nike brand campaigns. That's why I was a journalism major. Even though I didn't know at that time, I was naive. I thought that's getting a job at Nike and not Wieden and Kennedy or an agency. But that was sort of my way into sports. I loved basketball and I wanted to be around it and try and build a career from there.
Yeah, and there's something I built a whole business just around athletes' stories and how powerful they can be. Why were you so enthralled by those Nike commercials and continuing to tell the stories of athletes?
Yeah, I think they're just moving, they're motivating. Like I remember being a kid watching the Dwayne Wade commercial with Converse where it was like fall 6 times, get up 7, or fall 7, get up 8. And those were just like the most inspiring things for me, and I could relate to them the most, and I thought that would be something cool to work on. And yeah, I chose to be a journalism major after a year of like being exploratory. And it was truly because like we had a really top ranked journalism program, but also at the same time, like you can write about whatever you want. If I love food or if I love exercising, like that could be my specialty and what I wrote about. And so I could just kind of personally curate my own major.
And what do you bring into your current job now from that journalism, writing experience?
A lot. I mean, every day Overtime is a storytelling company and media outlet and engine. At the end of the day, we're trying to drive sports and culture in a unique voice that isn't being done by any other sort of platform out there. And so I always think about that, when I was a journalism major, it was newspaper articles, right? But what was the hook? And like now, if you go on Instagram or TikTok, like what's the opening hook for that post? It's still the same in terms of its structure, but it's not necessarily the same in terms of where that medium sits. But yeah, I think about all of those things. And now, we're tasked with so many different players that are joining our leagues. how are we telling their stories, amplifying their voice, and building their platforms personally. So every day is a new story, every day is a new project at Overtime, and so I hold on to a lot of that stuff, and now I even teach a class at the University of Florida called sports branding, so it's kind of full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into that. I want to jump into just your getting that first job at Reebok, right? The sports industry is really hard to, so it's hard to get your foot in, right? It's simple supply and demand. There's a lot of people who want the job, and there's only a certain amount of jobs. What did you do to separate yourself in order to get the job, but also while you were there?
I worked a lot while I was a student. So I was doing a ton of different stories. I was published on a few different things, from a Tebow story on ESPN to our local paper. And then I had a summer internship at the WTA Tour, women's tennis, which is headquartered in St. Pete, Florida. And I got the job. I hustled. I did everything I could there. I was writing for their website, looking at all their US Open, their tours, and this was when Kim Clijsters had just won the US Open after she had her first child, and so that was like the big story at the time. I met a woman at Reebok who was in charge of sports marketing at the time, named Diane Hayes, God bless her, and I kept in touch with her as much as I was probably the most annoying person in her life for a good semester. And she was like an icon in the industry. At first, Serena and Venus Williams were first Reebok athletes and stuff like that. So she was super connected, and tennis was kind of like this gateway into global sports, I thought. And so I kept in touch with her for quite a bit, and finally a role had opened that was entry level for a recent college graduate, and I got the job, flew to Canton, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston, did the whole interview process, and then before I graduated, I was on my way to Chicago for my first job ever.
And what were you doing? You know, what was expectation versus reality when you walk in those doors?
It was awesome. Like, I really learned. I had never been to Chicago before. I learned the landscape, learned the people, who was doing the really cool things in the city. I was in charge of local events, doing some grassroots marketing. If corporate ever came to town, I scooped them up from the airport and showed them around where the key retailers were and who the influencers were in that city. Adidas owned Reebok at the time. They've since sold it off. And so I had a little bit of crossover with Adidas and Reebok, but I was a little fortunate and lucky because at that time, this is 2011, 2012, Adidas had just signed Derrick Rose, and he was the youngest MVP, born and raised in Chicago, playing for the Chicago Bulls. They thought they had their next Jordan, and we were investing a ton into D Rose and that footwear franchise.
I remember those shoes.
At Foot Locker and everything like that. So I was kind of the guy on the ground. I loved basketball. I had a really strong connection to the basketball community there. I played like 3 times a week. And so from there, I did a ton of work on the ground, and then I got a call from Adidas headquarters, which is in Portland, Oregon, to join basketball for North America. And 2 years later,
you feel like getting drafted a little bit?
It felt like getting drafted. Although, it felt like getting drafted in a way. And I had never been to Portland in my life either. And that was the farthest thing from Florida you could ever get, probably within the US almost. And so I moved to Portland and started working on Adidas basketball for North America, not just D Rose, but soon Lillard, James Harden, Andrew Wiggins, they all come through the pipeline as signature athletes.
Can you talk about just after college, a lot of people work at smaller shops, right? Myself, I haven't worked for a company over 50 people. What is it like going in those doors of a big company, and what are the advantages to be doing that right after college?
The advantages of going to a larger company with a lot of different teams and cross-functional collaboration is you get to see so many different perspectives and so many different types of jobs. And so I might have been in field marketing in the beginning, but when I had the opportunity to go to headquarters, I had coffee or met with someone who was doing product development, someone who was doing design, someone who was doing brand marketing, and anything in between that I could learn and understand, because I still say this to this day, like, you're your best marketer if you understand a lot of different other fields that influence your field. And so that was probably my best advantage, going in there and just being confident and bold enough to just like, hey, can I grab a coffee with you? I'd love to learn more. And so I was going through campus and learning a lot from a lot of amazing, talented people, and that, spent 5 minutes with me. And so that was probably like the biggest advantage.
Yeah, and when you get the call from Adidas, what's your role look like, and what problems are they looking for you to solve?
It was US go-to-market and really looking at what does the merchandising and marketing for North America look like. So, D Rose is this new phenomenon. How can we build a product story and franchise each month? How do we take the All-Star Weekend colorway and make that into a really big story? How can the D Rose 2 have more influences from his life? Like we put Brenda, his mom's name, on the forefoot, and really trying to tie back those things to the city of Chicago where I just lived. What are the themes that are driving him that consumers can really relate to? So that was kind of my role, and working with a lot of different retailers too that were buying the product to land that story home, not only online or on social, but also at physical retail.
And how do you manage being creative and like pushing the boundaries of being creative while at, a marquee brand that's been around for a long, long time?
Yeah, I think
especially as somebody who's not super, super senior at the time.
Yeah, for sure. I think Adidas was really open-minded and really eager to hear from young people, and we had an influence on what the organization was doing. We had great leadership. I still talk to my managers till this day who are part of my original team in the basketball BU, and so that is also kudos to them, right? Their willingness to listen and understand. I had been the guy that just came from Chicago, which was such a hyper-focused city for us to win in, and a basketball hotbed in North America for sure. And so I was able to push the creative limits. I was also able to learn.
Was there a campaign that comes to mind?
A lot of it too was around bringing D Rose back from injury, in terms of a lot of that stuff. But
a tough day in the office watching him get
tough
hurt.
day in the office, but sometimes there's some clips that somehow find their way to me through the social algorithms out there where it's just like D Rose highlights pre-knees, and he was an absolute phenom. Yeah, he was special. And so, yeah, I pushed the limits in some cases and maybe got into a little trouble for sure. But at the same time,
do you have
like
any trouble stories?
No good trouble stories to share. Boss had to sit me down a few times, but other than that,
that's what happens when you're pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where some of the best work really comes from.
And you end up, you're a Florida kid. You move to Chicago. Then you're over in Oregon, and then you get the opportunity from Adidas to go to Germany. What made that, the right move for you?
Part of me really wanted to get international experience. I think this is like a Tim Ferriss book chapter, like Create a Real World MBA. And I had read his book, and I was like, you know what, I'm never going to go get my MBA. Maybe I could just create my own one here at Adidas. I think a lot of the leaders who were best in class at Adidas all had international experience, all had a global perspective with good cultural nuances from each region. And so global headquarters is in Germany. And so I joined a program that sent me there for 2 years to work on a new strategic initiative that the company had just started. It was called Global Key Cities. So it was looking at New York, LA, Shanghai, Tokyo, London, Paris, and like hyper local marketing and who are the influencers there and the best in class in terms of retail expression, all the marketing budget and all the product announcements first and foremost in those global 6 key cities. If you win in those, you win those regions more or less is the halo effect. And so I focused on that for 2 years and like traveled the world, saw so many things, and I learned a ton.
It sounds like such a badass job.
It was cool. And to do it in your 20s, I was really fortunate. And yeah, I can't thank Adidas enough for the opportunity.
How did you, so LA and New York, right? You kind of understand what's going on there, but like cities like Shanghai, how do you educate yourself on the culture when throwing a brand in there as well?
It goes back to what we just talked about too, which is like going to headquarters and meeting with as many people as you can. Like I had to meet the local teams and walk those cities, understand the key trade zones, the hot neighborhoods, and really build a relationship, right? Because you'll always have a dynamic at a really large company on the global team and the market team. And the biggest and best sort of work really comes when they're working together and synchronized. And it's not always the case, right? There's always challenges, there's always complexity. And sometimes the local market feels like global doesn't understand them, and the global team doesn't feel like the local market fully is, leaning into what they're trying to achieve. And so I was just trying to be a bridge builder, if you will, and work with the local teams and like fully immerse myself. I was just a sponge for like 2 years.
Yeah, that's a reoccurring theme. I think you just keep bringing up that you just wanted to learn and learn and learn.
Yeah, and I got to do it. And also at that time, I would say like Adidas was riding pretty high in terms of market and brand heat in general. Like the Stan Smith, the Superstar, the NMD, the Ultra Boost. Those are 4 shoes. Like I would say a Nike or Adidas, Puma, or Under Armour, like they hope 2 footwear franchises are absolutely thriving at one time. Like we had 4, and this was probably on the cusp of like Yeezy about to be a $1 billion business too. So it was like riding a really high wave at that time.
You weren't there with when it like Yeezy, all that stuff went down, right?
I was not there when it went down. Yeah. When I moved to New York City with Adidas and joined the fashion and style collaborations team, we had just done Yeezy season 1, and we were working on all the next wave
fun Kanye stories
of Yeezy and Pharrell. I do not have any fun Kanye stories, and I would say also like I most closely loved and connected, and I still look at him as like one of the best to ever do it is Pharrell. Like he's what his product stood for, his brand, his creativity. Obviously now he's at LV and doing a really cool job there, but like he's super innovative, and I've always been a big fan of his.
Absolutely. I want to get into your overtime stuff, but I have one last question just about the Adidas world. You know, you've traveled all these different places, and you said a real life MBA, which is like that's how I feel about a lot of the work that I've done. But I'm curious, with that MBA or with that real life MBA, what's like one thing that has been tangible from those travels or a lesson?
I mean, it's a really good question. I think if you're a well-traveled person, it increases your intelligence in ways that you don't always even notice or see. It's made me more comfortable going abroad. It's made me even able to open up a conversation with someone from a different background and have an understanding. Like perhaps I can't go deep in this subject matter, but I could talk to you about 3 things at the table from your country or from your place or from your culture. And I think that is something that is super valuable in business, in relationships, and I always kind of credit some of that too. And also just like traveling the world is amazing and everyone should do it.
Yeah, fun time. So overtime, let's get into it. For any of our listeners who like don't know what overtime is, give me the elevator pitch.
We are a sports platform. We often say we're a sports platform for the next generation. Gen Z, millennials are our target. We started covering high school basketball, a really niche focus when LaMelo Ball, Zion Williamson were doing the high-flying dunks that were super viral on social. That was primarily us in high school gyms covering those. Now, we say, you know, we're really in the sports IP building space. We're building leagues. We have Overtime Elite, our basketball property with an arena in Atlanta. We just launched OT Select, our women's basketball product. OT7 kicks off next week. It's our 7-on-7 football league. And this Friday in Atlanta, OTX, our boxing league for this year starts. And so we do a lot of different things. We always try and be a community first and foremost. We respond to our comments, we respond to DMs. We have 100 million followers across all of our platforms. TikTok is our largest, which gives you somewhat of a understanding of our audience demo, right? And we always try and be of the culture. We're not talking about sports analytics. We're not talking about like play on court for the most part from a stats perspective. We're really talking about those moments, what's driving culture, what's driving trends. We do a pretty big size apparel business now on both e-com and at stores like PacSun. We've really become a brand, and we've really put a lot of focus into being a brand and not just like a media company that's passive to scroll and look at. And we do a lot of long form shows. We have YouTube shows, Snapchat shows, episodic series and stuff like that.
But with Overtime, how'd that opportunity come up for you?
I moved to New York with Adidas, and
I just realized the hoodie too.
Yeah. Adidas is one of our biggest partners, just across some of our leagues, OTE specifically. They're the official outfitter of OTE, and so I work with a lot of my friends and counterparts, former counterparts that from before as well. So life always comes full circle. Good lesson. But what was your question actually? How did it come about? Overtime, how did it come about? Yeah. So Overtime came about because one of my really close friends, his name's Josh Tucker, he introduced me to Dan, the co-founder of Overtime. And I met Dan for coffee. It was probably a 6-month process by the time I met with him versus all the interviews and when I finally took the job. And I met with Dan, and Overtime really was just an Instagram account at the time. It wasn't really on my big picture, this is where my next move is. But I would meet with Dan, and I would talk with him and I was like, this guy is a big nerd. And then I'd leave that meeting and be like, this guy is a total gangster. Like, I love the way he thinks about work in the world and what he thinks the vision of Overtime is. It was just an Instagram account, like I said at the time, but more or less, like, he was like, we're in the dreams business. We could be the next Disney. If a kid wants to wear the Overtime hoodie, that means like they're an athlete. That means they're next up. They're trying to get to the next level. And we can't always feature all these kids who DM us like, I'm underrated, like, you guys should post me, but they could wear Overtime. And so we've kind of built this sort of brand from there, and a lot of that's a testament to his vision. And then I joined shortly after to kind of help grow everything from a brand standpoint.
Yeah, and Overtime is a really cool example because it's a definition of like building. A lot of people say build your community, whatever it is. Like, they straight up, and you guys built that community and have turned it into a real business more than an Instagram page, like you're saying. I was talking to you about this before the podcast, but one of my, I tutor somebody who's 12 years old, and I was talking about March Madness, which is what's going on right now, and he didn't know anything. He didn't know what was going on. He didn't really know any of the college teams, but he plays basketball. He's on an AAU team, and he was like, so what do you watch, like, other than the NBA? And he goes, oh, OTE. And I was like, that was like a click for me. Like, it just was like, because I personally, like, I had never watched it. Yeah. And I was like, that's very ambitious of Overtime, and it's awesome. But like, I barely watch the NBA. I'm not going to watch OTE. But when he said that, I was like, they are building something special. And like Gary Vee always says, like, it's creepy, but watch what the 11-year-olds are doing on their phones, because that's going to be what's next. So I'm curious, like, was that the pitch from Dan?
Not necessarily. When I joined, we didn't talk about leagues, and it wasn't on our radar at all. It became more or less like we evolved into thinking this way once we did an event called The Takeover. It was the best high school basketball, boys and girls. We made a movie. They all came together, and it was a game and a 3-on-3 tournament and a king of the court and everything like that. And we just started realizing there's a system of high school basketball that's a bit broken, and LaMelo Ball, as an example, who we covered through multiple shows, goes to Australia for a year instead of staying to find an opportunity here in the US. And we were like, well, if anyone could help solve this problem, perhaps it could be us. And that was the genesis of OTE. But now your story is a story that I hear now quite often, and a lot of kids are into us, not necessarily watching the NCAA or the NBA. I was sitting next to one of our investors during an OTE playoffs, and he brought his son who was 8 or 10 years old, and he was like, I still can't believe how my son knows every single player at OTE. And we were having a conversation about it, and I was, because this is his thing. This is what he loves. You know Jalen Brunson and you know the New York Knicks. That's everyone's thing. But like, OTE is this kid's thing. And for me, it was like, when I was in college, like, I was getting on Facebook, right? And that was our thing in college. And then my mom joined and my grandma joined, and like, now we were off Facebook and like we were on to the next thing. And so I think about that in a lot of the ways in which people consume content, evolve, and go on to different things.
What's one of the best ways that you separate yourself from the league or from the NBA? Because they are, in talking about leagues, they are very progressive when it comes to content and doing things correctly.
We're the most progressive, I would say, when it comes to content. I think we separate ourselves because, one, I think like Mark Cohn's our chief content officer. I think he's one of the most brilliant minds in the space, and he also is obsessed with sports. Has a fantasy baseball team and all of these things. I don't know if he wants me to tell you that, but I, on the other hand, like, do not follow sports. I'm not part of a fantasy team. Watching NFL on Sunday is like the least of my interests. I'm looking at like pop culture, what's trending in music, like a lot of different things in streetwear fashion, and like influencing that into our product. Even WWE, which is by far one of the most entertaining sports products.
Because sports is entertainment at the end of the
day.
Yeah.
And so we've infused a lot of that into OTE, even from our team identities, which we co-created with the players. They're streetwear brands versus like a city with a name, you know? And those jerseys are really loud and expressive, and these kids are obsessed with now our teams, and those have become merch businesses in themselves. We also have done a lot more behind the scenes work just from a camera standpoint. Like Overtime Tom, who's been on this podcast before, does the vibe cam. He's wearing glasses during the game with a camera, interviewing players live right before they're about to shoot a free throw. And you get this up close and personal perspective that you can never get as a fan. Also, kudos to Mark, AMP, which is Kai Cenat, Agent, Duke Dennis, some of the best Twitch streamers in the world, they broadcast our games. And for our fans who are sometimes watching on their phone or at home, like they talk like they talk. And that makes them feel like they're talking with them versus like Shaq, Charles, Ernie, they're the best to ever do it, but they're talking to you and they're talking in suits. This is a different experience. And we try and always think about every single touch point. And even just from like our games are on Prime Video on Amazon, and so is our long form docuseries like our Drive to Survive. So we try and have everything really innovative. Now we're broadcasting our games on TikTok. You could turn your phone horizontally and watch our games on TikTok, and that's a big new funnel for us as well.
It reminds me of, it's like fans first, right? I had Jesse Cole, the owner of the Savannah Bananas, like putting that. Are you familiar with him?
Not only have read the book and spoke to Jared Orton, his president, because I set up a meeting with him before we fully launched OTE, because they're the best to ever do it in the sports and entertainment space, to take a minor league baseball team and make it a sensation and make people
not even minor league, it's like below single A baseball.
And so actually in my sports branding class at UF, we all have to read Fans First by Jesse Cole. Nice. I've never met Jesse, but I've talked to Jared, and he's actually going to join my class as a guest lecturer, and they are absolutely brilliant. And I take a lot of cues from what they did. One of the things that we do is it's called the sixth fan. And so instead of like, the sixth man, but the sixth fan, a kid every game gets to sit next to the player bench as the sixth fan. And he gets a whole experience. He gets a pair of Adidas sneakers, he gets a hoodie, and he gets interviewed on the Vibe cam.
That's how you create that's also how you create a fan for life.
And and I think Jesse Cole's whole mantra is like, I don't know if he says this, but he says, how do we reduce the barrier between fan and athlete? And that is like everything I've tried to queue up for OTE.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you guys are well on your way, but it's not surprising to me that you have, taken some of his work and just the way he operates into what you're doing now.
Did you have Jesse on this podcast?
Yep.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. Like he might have been 25, 30. So it was like they were just coming up on my TikTok page, 50K, 100K followers. Yeah.
He posted today, or I saw the post this morning, of the first ever baby race on the field. So they had like a bunch of 1-year-olds, none of them could really walk, racing to their parents on the other side, and it was absolutely wild. But those are the types of things he's always testing, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I appreciate it too. I'm curious, like you run brand for Overtime and the league. How do you define the brand in 1-2 sentences?
I think Overtime is a brand for athletes, and if you're wearing an Overtime hoodie, it's like wearing a varsity jacket in the high school hallway. I think I equate it in a lot of ways when I'm telling people like that. You can reach Overtime and consume Overtime content. You can wear Overtime. You can root for our players. You can come experience our games. We're like the entire sports Gen Z ecosystem all in one place, and I think that's what's differentiated us a lot, and we try and stay like really culturally fast and quick. And
what would the athletes say? We spoke a lot about the consumers, the 12-year-old kids who are watching this stuff, but the actual players.
They would say, Overtime puts me on. Yeah. That's how they say it.
Shay Dawson, who's a past guest of this podcast, she spoke a lot about this 3 years ago, about how the people at Overtime are like best friends with the actual players. Is that still the case?
We're still very close with the players. Of course, there's a level of professionalism as well, so sometimes there is a point of separation. I do have a lot of good conversations with our players as a friend and as a mentor or supporter in a lot of different ways. And most of the time, every part of our strategy when we're launching something new or we're creating a product is how do we co-create with them. And so I work with the players all the time. Like, I can't take all the credit for any of our team names, as an example. Like the City Reapers, we sat in a room just like this with all the OTE initial players and was like, what do you want your team to be called? And we did a whole work session. And so I think taking that influence from the audience and from our players is the best focus group you can ever have, and that's a big part of what we do, and we move fast with it.
And you guys don't actually have teams from cities, correct?
Correct. So
that was done intentionally, obviously.
Done intentionally, because the biggest insights that I've gotten working and learning about Overtime is that Gen Z and this group of teenagers, they don't care where their parents rooted for. they don't care about their hometown team. In some cases, they root for, I might love the Lakers, even though I'm not from California or LA, because LeBron's on that team. Or I might love the New York Knicks because that's my favorite team in NBA 2K. And some of those influences are not related to like what we think traditional sports fandom looks like. And so with that in mind, all the OTE teams, while they are based in different cities, they don't necessarily ever have a city name attached to it.
Absolutely. I know the PLL does something similar too, which is, and also has that like Gen Z sport. So it's interesting to see Gen Z adopting that, right?
Yeah,
Because that just wouldn't necessarily be a thing for millennials. Curious, what keeps you up at night? What are you excited about with everything you're building, whether it be here, personal life?
What keeps me up at night? I mean, I'm always thinking about what are ways that we can innovate and grow for the next season, and how can we grow our audience? Like, that's our biggest mission, is making OTE and some of our leagues an undeniable aspect of the sports ecosystem. We have a long way to go still, but season 3, only 3 years in for a new sports league, we've had phenomenal growth and we've had amazing viewership. So while I'm proud and while I have a ton of thoughts on how we can get better, I am still very excited. But I'm sleeping pretty well right now, actually. I have an Oura Ring, and I've been super focused on trying to sleep better. It's my biggest area of improvement.
There you go. I've been trying to get Doug Sweeney, the CMO of Oura Ring, on the pod. He keeps saying no, but
well, send him this clip. Let him know that I'm a fan of the sleep aspect of it. The exercise aspect, we got to talk more.
We got to talk, yeah. I have some other famous good rejections. I got rejected by Mark Cuban coming on the pod. He emailed me right when the NBA season was kicking off for the first time after COVID season. Yeah. So I'm a little busy right now. And then Pete Carroll. And
nice. Where's Pete now?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
He might have some time.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. I wanted to enter the quick question round. Sweet. So before we hit the quick question round, I want to give a big shout out to Open Fortune for making this podcast episode possible. I never thought that I'd be in MSG Studios recording a podcast with amazing people sponsored by a fortune cookie company, but here we are. So without further ado, let's crack open one of these bad boys and see if it has anything to do with our conversation.
Oh, these are hard to open a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
What's going on?
There you go. All right.
Are you just gonna bite it, or are you breaking it?
I'm breaking it. What do you do? You just eat it?
Should I just bite it?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. There you go. Everybody's got a way.
It's delicious.
Yeah. People started eating the fortune, so we needed to make them.
Sorry, I'm making a mess here. Yeah. Oh, did I just tear my fortune in half? Yeah. I didn't bite good enough.
But people eat there was like a thing going around that like on TikTok that people were eating their fortunes because that's the only way it would come true.
Oh, wow.
So we needed to make the fortunes like the color grade ink, like edible. Like this is an edible piece of paper.
Is this edible piece of paper?
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. I feel safer now. Make a drastic change. It will benefit you immediately.
There you go.
Wow, that's heavy.
That is heavy.
That's heavy.
I feel like life is pretty good for you right now.
Yeah, I don't want to make any drastic changes right now.
Yeah.
But all right, I'll see what it could be applicable to.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can make a drastic change in like a content strategy or something. Make it something cool.
That could be, if it's cool. If it's cool. If it's cool. I'll think about it.
Your future is a garden of possibilities. Wow. Cultivate it with passion.
Wow. Damn. Brought to you by, what's a good?
San Jacinto College.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Shout out. Who do you got?
Mine is
Verizon?
Oh, yeah. There's something free inside Verizon.
There you go.
I am a Verizon customer.
Yeah, I am too.
Wow.
I'm not a San Jacinto customer, but maybe my kids will be. All right.
There you go.
All right. So, person you'd most want to sit down to dinner with, dead or alive?
Dead or alive? Steve Jobs.
Favorite city in the world?
New York City.
Is it okay to sleep with socks on?
On a cold night, only if you're wearing clothes as well, not just socks.
Yeah,
only.
I agree. That's psychopath behavior. Yeah. Would you ever live abroad? If so, where? You have, obviously.
I did. If so, again, London, Paris, Amsterdam.
Favorite UF grad? Chomp.
Tim Tebow.
Is Santa real?
Yes.
In 40 years, what would people be nostalgic for?
No phones.
All up here. What's the worst advice you've ever been given?
Damn, I don't have a good answer for that one. Worst advice I've ever been given. Well, you know what? I did get a lot of advice on not going to overtime when I thought about taking the job because it was such a big risk and no one was truly familiar with the company. So that was the worst advice I've ever gotten.
One sentence, how would you sum up the internet?
Toxic right now, maybe.
Favorite thing about Overtime Tom?
Favorite thing about Overtime Tom? I have a lot. He's a really great point guard, by the way. He's like an amazing passer, and I play basketball with him on Sundays, and he always finds me.
Least favorite thing about Overtime Tom?
He doesn't post our apparel enough.
Here we go, you can send him that. Who's somebody you think should hop on this podcast?
Nelson Newman.
What's Nelson Newman?
He's like a young basketball creator that
Love it.
We have a show with him on Overtime.
Love it.
He'd give you a good perspective.
And in 2034, where can we catch you 10 years from now?
10 years from now, where can you catch me? Hopefully just like having a coffee, waking up my kids. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for
joining us. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Man.